If for some reason it won't load on large, we'll have to do it on the small. I mean, it's not the same impact having it on a smaller screen, but we will. Let's see if it loads in the next couple of minutes. Yeah, so I should say afterwards, what we're planning to do is tomorrow we'll be uploading a blog on the Co-op Foundation website, which will have this webinar in full on there, and it will also have a short written summary. So they're the main takeaways, which is about sort of 3 PDF slides long. So they'll be available that will be available as a blog on the Co-op Foundation website for you to have as a reference if you want to watch it back. Or as I say, there'll be the written version as well. So this doesn't seem to want to work in London. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to share it like this, which was not the plan, but that's what happens when you're trying to work with technology. So hopefully everybody can see that. I'll just move the notes bit down because we don't need that anyway, and hopefully it'll make for a larger screen for you. So I'll have to get started like this. So the agenda for today, we're just going to go through some introductions. Already been through housekeeping, which is basically if you don't want to be recorded with your video on, please turn your video off now, and also make sure that you're muted throughout. Even for the Q&A section, my colleague Hannah is going to be checking the chat. So if you've got a question throughout, Hannah's going to keep track of those, and then we're going to have the Q&A part at the end. We're then going to talk about, for anybody that doesn't know the history of Known You're Not Alone, we're going to briefly go through that and talk about our achievements over the last 5 years, thanks to the young people like Zak that we have worked with over the last 5 years. Then Eloise, who's on the call, is going to talk us through the importance of lived experience for campaigning and how to help young people unearth experience. And I'm going to let Eloise introduce herself very shortly, along with Zak. Then Zak is going to talk us through what it was like to be a young co-designer on behalf of the other young co-designers as well. We had a session recently, so he's going to feedback on that. Then I'm going to go through what our learnings from closing down a campaign for anybody that might be useful to have that as future knowledge. We're going to go through our recommendations, which I've split into various sections depending on which area you work in, and then finally we'll have a Q&A. So to start with, introductions. So I'm Sophie Beresford. I might have met quite a few of you on the call before, but if not, I am the campaign manager for the Co-op Foundation. Eloise, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Eloise Bella. I'm the creative director who led the initial brand development and the creative content of the campaign over the last 5 years. And in addition to doing freelance work, I'm also a PhD candidate at Loughborough University, and I teach communication at the Royal College of Art.
Fabulous, thanks Eloise. And Zak?
Hi everyone, I'm Zak Betraoui. I was a young co-designer on the Lonely Not Alone project. I started in 2020 and worked all my way through till the end. So hopefully I can talk to you through that today.
Great, thanks Zak. So first of all, tackling youth loneliness. So as you can see on here, some of you might have seen this before. Sorry for the repetition, but the Co-op Foundation has been focused on youth loneliness since 2017. This is some work that the Co-op first started when they did some research with the British Red Cross, and that piece of research showed us that young people were lonely more than any other age group. Some of you on this call might already know that, but for those of you that don't, that's what that piece of information revealed. We then launched, as the Co-op Foundation, we launched our Belong programme to tackle youth loneliness in 3 different ways. So we started by funding projects UK-wide. Often these projects were in partnership with DCMS, and the budget and the amount of funding that we gave out in total through the Belong programme for funding projects was £7 million. We then had the second part, which is strengthening the youth sector. And what we wanted to do around this piece of work was making it fit for purpose. So what we did is we commissioned some research through UK Youth. And what we wanted to do through this research was to focus on the perspective of tackling youth loneliness from the perspective of youth workers. So what we did is we asked them, this piece of work was called A Place to Belong, and what we wanted to find out is what youth workers needed to be able to do this. As a result, we ended up funding what they needed, which turned out to be a network for being able to collaborate and also providing some training resources. And you might know of the Belong Collective, which is fabulously delivered by UK Youth. The work that we commissioned helped to create that. And then also there's a National Youth Partnership, which is led by led by Youth Focus North East. And then finally, you'll see here that we've got tackling youth loneliness. And that is where Lonely Not Alone came in. And all of that work came from one of our first pieces of research, which was called All Our Emotions Research, that found that 81% of young people said that a fear of others' reactions would stop them talking about feeling lonely. So that's when Lonely Not Alone was born. That's why we decided to go into the campaigning space to help deliver on this piece of work. So the history of Lonely Not Alone, as you can see here, is a Co-op Foundation campaign, as you might already know, and it's made by young people for young people to tackle the stigma of youth loneliness. So we launched in 2019 because we wanted to show everybody, we wanted to show young people specifically that everybody cared about youth loneliness, and we wanted to give people an opportunity to do that. According to our 2019 research, 26% of young people felt confident talking about their loneliness, while only 43% thought it was a normal emotion for their age group. So we wanted to change that through the campaign, and we wanted to help young people to take the lead in doing that. Because we found that if young people are unable to talk about loneliness, that they were less likely to ask for help, and overall that would have a negative impact on their mental well-being. Also, by launching Lonely Not Alone, that helped us to build, as the Co-op Foundation, it helped us to build fairer, more cooperative communities, but it also helped us deliver on Co-op's vision of cooperating for a fairer world. So what the campaign looked like over the years, some of you might be familiar with the way that the campaign evolved. 2019, we started with our first group of young co-designers, who came up with the name of the campaign, and they also came up with our ask, which was to wear yellow socks to show that they cared about youth loneliness. And as you'll see here, it started off with animations that sort of captured what feeling lonely felt like in many different ways. I'm going to shortly play the video from 2022. I'm not going to play the whole thing because understandably it's quite long in length, but I'm just going to play you a bit of the intro so you can see how the campaign sort of evolved, especially when we compare it to 2022.
Young people are lonely more than any other age group. So this year, we'd like everyone to wear an outfit of the day with yellow socks to show young people everywhere that even though they're lonely, they're not alone.
Loneliness doesn't come in one shape or form. It can affect any age, any religion, any race, anybody.
When you're lonely, you look down.
So that is from 2020, and that was focused on extending the reach of the yellow socks. So encouraging people to wear yellow socks to show that they cared about youth loneliness. That's both young people and also adults as well. And that idea came from the young people who said that when they were feeling lonely, they would look at the floor. And obviously, if you're looking at the floor, you might see somebody's socks. So it was a subtle sign to say, we care about youth loneliness. You can speak to me about loneliness. And we got great response from that as well. And it was especially prevalent given the pandemic and the impact that had on young people. 2021, we launched the digital universe that a lot of you might be familiar with now, where we shared stories and built empathy around experiencing loneliness. And then finally, last year, we expanded the universe even further, asking people of all ages to share a message of support. I'm going to talk a little bit more about why we did that later on. And we were still encouraging young people to share their consolation. And what's beautiful about last year's campaign is that some of the young co-designers, including Zak, embodied their constellations to show people that they didn't need to feel ashamed to experience loneliness. So I'm going to play a little bit of this now. You'll see that the field for last year's campaign is slightly different and has evolved from 2020 in that it was a lot more of the young people were sharing their personal experiences of loneliness. So I'll play that for you now.
family life, and I've always found it a lot easier.
I don't think loneliness is something that should be necessarily overcome, but I think it's something that should be understood.
When you feel lonely, you crave a feeling of understanding and being understood.
Having no embarrassment or shame to be able to talk openly.
We always have a negative image of ourselves when we feel lonely and we feel like it's our fault.
So I think it's really important for us to be able to say, yeah, I feel lonely, and, you know, that's okay.
I should say that both of these videos, if you want to watch them in full, because I know what technology is like and it can make it a bit jumpy, they're on our YouTube channel. So if you go on YouTube, search for Lonely Not Alone, you'll see each of these if you want to follow them, if you want to watch them in full. They're really beautiful pieces, so I encourage you to do that if you can. So why Lonely Not Alone was youth-led. So we wanted, given that it was a youth campaign and focused on helping young people, we felt like the campaign should be informed by young people's genuine experiences, and not just taking those ideas and running with them and creating them ourselves, but involving them in every step of the process. Working with young people helped us to uncover different reasons why young people were lonely, and you'll see that now reflected on the Lonely Not Alone universe, where we have the different constellations which reflects the different reasons why people are lonely, and we group those together in stories so people can find those who might be lonely for similar reasons, and they can help find their tribe. We also felt that it created a really authentic campaign that resonates with young people. For young people to take action, they had to be able to resonate with it and feel that it was truly authentic. And working with the young co-designers definitely helped to make that happen, and is one of the reasons that we strongly believe that it has been as successful as it has been. At the COP Foundation, as many of you know, we are very big on creating opportunities for youth activism. And the Lonely Not Alone campaign provided us with an opportunity to give young people a chance to do that. So that was also really important. We also felt that we needed to draw on our cooperative values of democracy and showing solidarity and caring for others. As a COP Foundation campaign, it's obviously important that we had those values entwined within the campaign. So this gave us a really good opportunity to do that. And also, working with young people gave us some really helpful insights into marketing of communications, in that it helped us to understand what channels they were actually using, the type of content they were actually consuming. So that was really helpful for us as well. And as I say, making it youth-led was one of the best decisions that we made, and certainly made it as impactful as it has been by taking that approach. So now I've got a short video. It's not from YouTube, so hopefully it will work nice and smoothly, of our key achievements over the last 5 years for you to watch. So some of them you might have seen before, but hopefully that's a nice recap about what we were able to achieve through the campaign. Now I've kind of done all the background stuff and the history, I'm going to pass over to Eloise, where she's going to talk through what it's like to work with young people and how you help them unearth their lived experience.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sophie. It's so nice to see the last 5 years. This has been one of my favourite things to work on for the whole 5 years. So it's really nice to see it at this kind of retrospective stage. Sophie, what I'm going to do is just ask you to jump forward on each slide, if that's okay. So I'll just say, can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. So let's jump straight over to lived experience. Next slide, Sophie, please. Fabulous. So I'm going to be talking today about how we did this, like how we worked with imagination and enchantment and what have you to actually go from a room full of people who've experienced loneliness to this kind of final campaign artifact. So starting from the beginning, lived experience is sometimes more easily defined by what it's not. So lived experience is not someone's opinion. Lots of research shows that people's opinions are actually rarely an accurate reflection of what they know or how they behave or how they're going to behave. So lived experience is something someone has lived in or with or possibly grown up with, so it has become a part of them. And in the cases of the young people who worked on Lonely Not Alone over the years, some of the young people who applied to take part describe loneliness which started as an event or a specific moment, a moment in time, such as starting college or a death in the family or moving to a women's refuge with a tiny baby sister and a mum who was terminally ill. And other young people talked about lonelinesses which seem to have been there much longer. Being an only child who'd always cared for a disabled mum, a young woman who'd grown up in a different religion and culture to her peers, a young person whose identity was barely tolerated at school and they weren't allowed to speak of this, for example. So lived experience may show up in habits and thought processes and physicality and social practices and how we make sense of the world. And in extreme cases, lived experience can become coded into DNA, so it's passed on epigenetically. And when you're that close to a way of knowing, your knowledge is both incredibly deep and insightful, and also you may not know what you know because it's just your life. So when I'm talking about working with young people's lived experiences, I'm not talking about their opinions. I'm talking about the knowledge that's coded into them, into all of us, because of who we are and what we know and how we live and maybe what we've had to do to survive. So that was the kind of knowledge we were working with when we were engaging with children, with young people on Lonely Not Alone. And jumping to the next slide, when we started, we knew from the research that co-ops just proceed here that we were working on a campaign about a subject matter that's hard to talk about and historically has been taboo and has been mixed up with a lot of shame and self-blame. People often blame themselves for their loneliness, and research commissioned by the Co-op Foundation back in 2008 showed lots of young people conceal that experience. Some of the research also showed in particular that teenage boys and young men who were going through the impacts of loneliness hadn't identified for themselves that loneliness was the root cause. And so as we set out to create a brand and a campaign, we had to find ways to help young people express and manifest something that was coded into their identity, was very difficult to speak of, had often been unexpressed, was bottled up and hidden. And those young people who'd volunteered to take part had real potential, really particular needs around feeling safe and feeling cared for and feeling wanted and belonged, because that might be something they've not experienced much of before. So jumping to the next slide. As we were going into this campaign, we were thinking about ways to help young people come up with insight and ideas which would manifest that lived experience they had into a new brand and a national ad campaign. And we knew that sitting and talking about it was going to be difficult, might be overwhelming or boring. Some things might be unsayable, and it might end up focusing on reminiscence about what happened to each of us. What you might call data rather than insight. So what we needed to do was get to the kind of underlying insight, the root causes, the key experiences, and to generate creative expressions of those insights so we could create something that was powerful and meaningful and useful to lots of young people experiencing loneliness in the UK. And I think the Co-op approach, the Co-op Foundation approached me at the time because I was doing a lot of creative work around the unsayable with young people and children. And I've been working on a co-creation approach that was evocatory rather than direct. So using young people's multiple ways of knowing, including emotion and embodied knowledge and imagination, rather than only asking people to tell me things and listen to each other and write. And the work I was doing was about generating social collective ways of knowing rather than working with each individually in the group. And that collectivity is really important to Co-op Foundation because of cooperation being all about collective strength and creating things that are more than the sum of their parts. And by the way, this problem of how to help people say the unsayable by engaging other ways of knowing than only speaking or listening is an ongoing research question for a whole group of practitioners and academics worldwide, as this little excerpt here from this research paper by Dunn and Mellor kind of shows. So jumping on to the next slide, that was quite philosophical, theoretical stuff that underpinned the approach we took as we went into it. But let's just talk about some really practical stuff. So on the next slide, you can see that we worked together for 7 to 10 days. Oh, next slide, please, Sophie. And in 2019, that was studio-based. And in 2022, that was residential studio based. But in 2020 and 2021, we worked completely online, except when we were in production. And even then, it was socially distanced. And I think the crucial takeaway from this bit that I really want you to hear is, on average, we'd work together during the kind of research and development phase, the discovery phase, for 70 hours at a time. So when we were coming back up with ideas to pitch to Sophie and the team of what we were proposing to do with this year's campaign and why, it was based in 70 hours of collaboration. And that really contrasts with some co-creative approaches where it's just a few hours. So jumping to the next slide, you'll see that 10 to 14 young people took part. They ranged between 12 and 22, and we never really had a problem. Maybe Zak can talk about this later on. It never really felt like there were adults in the room and young people in the room. It just felt like we were all in the room working together. But there were 2 to 4 creative adults in the studio space, and they had lived experience of loneliness. All travel and accommodation and food and materials were provided all the way through. And crucially, we didn't incentivize young people to take part with extrinsic things like vouchers or payment. The young people volunteered because they wanted to address the problem of loneliness for other young people like them. Jumping to the next slide. People often ask about what we actually do in the studio, and Zak and I have laughed quite a lot about how very difficult this is to explain. It's a method I built for myself over about 15 years of practice, and it's based in lots of frameworks, including post-human education and social pedagogy and stuff I've adapted from Santre work and play work. And it's something I'm researching for a PhD alongside the young people who worked on Lonely Not Alone. They've given me incredible insight into what's going on from their point of view. So basically the way we start is I go into the studio with a very few warm-up games planned and a suite of devices or tools that I use to stimulate playfulness and to help us say unsayable knowledges. And on the next slide, which we'll jump to now, that looks kind of like this. So I offer the group activities, each of which are loosely shaped around one of these 10 devices. And each time I offer an activity, it's based on what the group said or did during the previous activity. So it means that all of the content, absolutely everything, comes from the group without me dictating or kind of bringing in anything. And there's no particular order to how these devices are used, except from these very rough groupings. So we always start with promises, and we always end up with a magic eye device, which is the process of synthesizing all the ideas and insights and images and symbols we've generated as we've been playing together. The devices are generic, playful provocations, and I usually add some extra specific theming to each one. So, for example, when we used the experience device in 2022 in the barn in Derbyshire, the group had decided through an earlier piece of work that the crucial things we were trying to give our audiences this year were courage to talk about loneliness and connection to other people experiencing this, so they didn't feel alone in that loneliness. So I asked them to split into teams and create an experience that evokes courage and connection for the rest of the group. And they created a dinner party, a fireside chat, a sort of beautiful ritual of reading things out by candlelight, and a fairly terrifying hostage situation. And we took all that learning about what was helpful and what we wanted to avoid, and it became embedded in the Lonely Not Alone universe and the chats we took out to schools and into a TikTok campaign. And what I learned is that building collective safety, psychological safety, is the crucial first step. And we really never stop doing that. So everything we do in the studio is specifically designed to help everyone, both participants and professionals, to feel safe and valued and like they are exactly where they're meant to be. And we build collective safely mainly through creative risk. So I constantly ask everyone to do activities that push and push at the edge of their comfort zones, and then immediately then wrap them with comforting layers of appreciation and seeing the beauty in that creative risk until the group kind of gradually internalizes that. And it's worth saying that each of these devices asks for some sort of final thing to be made and then witnessed by the rest of the group. But I often keep that quite broad so everyone can respond with their own talents or skills or at a level which is useful for them wherever they are in their development or growth. So for example, when someone has experienced something very difficult or painful, asking them to specifically role play it could be really unhelpful. But asking them to work with projective methods such as drawing or sculpture, or embodied methods such as creating a kind of space, can feel safer and more accessible for them. And as we go through the whole workshop process, we develop insight through playing together and then treating those playful little artworks and experiences and sculptures and photo shoots as sources of rich data, which then together we deconstruct. And we look at the semiotics of what it is, what does it look like, what does it smell like, what does it sound like, what it achieves for us emotionally, where we feel it in our bodies. And then we look at the hermeneutic layer. So what does this reaction that we're having to this work mean for our campaign? What have we understood about loneliness, or what are we trying to achieve through engaging in these tiny little artworks? And so gradually these little bits of knowledge and symbols and metaphors become our advertising insights and our creative expression of that insight. And then we gather it all up, maybe 4 or 5 of our favourites, and pitch it to Sophie and the Co-op Foundation team. And that final bit, the rounds of insight, they take a little bit of time to build the group's expertise or understanding of what the game is. But once one of our key takeaways is working in this way, the more time you dedicate to this discovery section, the better the whole campaign will be at the end. And I do have this whole theory I'm working on for my PhD about the uses of enchantment and how the workshop space becomes this kind of parallel universe where it's possible to think and say and do things that really wouldn't feel okay in the real world. And that insight has come from the research interviews I did with people like Zak and Nathan and Eloise about what it's like to go through the workshop experiences. So jumping to the next slide, if this is interesting to you, I'll be giving an hour-long presentation and Q&A at Magnify conference this year, specifically about what happens in the studio, about enchantment, multimodal play and co-creation, because I've really only shown you the surface of this today. So if you have time to join me there, that would be great to have you along. Jumping to the next slide, we were talking a minute about time. This work takes time. With Lonely Not Alone, we've generally been working on 12-month cycles where we try to sign off the creative brief in the second month. And finding the young people who have skin in the game and then getting them safely onboarded is a really huge job of risk assessing and getting permissions and organising safe travel and making sure everyone feels safe to arrive on the first day. Once the young people are onboarded, they are the campaign team. There is no point in the subsequent process where the young people aren't involved or invited to be involved. And the workshops are the bit that I often speak about because people find that really interesting, but there is a whole process which kicks in once we've pitched our campaign ideas to the clients. Once we've chosen an expression, we go through this period of idea refinement, which usually takes a weekend, and then we get that signed off again, and then we move into production. Sometimes that takes 3 to 5 months. And throughout that stage, young people are working on scripts and storyboards and design. Sometimes they're choosing specialists to work with, like animators or game designers. Sometimes they're out filming or assisting with filming, or they've taken over elements of production entirely, such as costume design or choreography. And academic research suggests that the best campaign outcomes happen when young people are thoroughly attached all the way through and don't just get consulted at the beginning to have an idea and then we go away and make it. So jumping to the final slide as a quick sum up, working with lived experience means understanding that for some young people, what they have lived and experienced runs through them like words in a stick of rock, and it's what they're made of, it's who they are. So asking is unlikely to be a very effective way to help them access that embodied knowledge. And it also ignores young people's other ways of knowing, their unconscious knowledges, their emotional knowledges, their knowledges which they access through imagination and enchantment and symbols. So I've talked a bit today about how we did that in Making Lonely Not Alone, and talked about their devices for evocation, which give the group multimodal ways to access their own knowledges and to make sense of them collectively with the rest of the group, leading to advertising insight and creative expressions. And I've explained that young people don't just take part in the idea formulation stage, but they pitch it to the client, they refine the idea, and then they take it all the way into production as very cherished, very expert members of our team. And I'm really happy to answer any questions either in the seminar or at Magnify, or you can reach me through my website. But for now, I think I'm passing you to Zak, maybe, or back to Sophie and Zak.
Yes, thanks very much, Eloise. So Zak's now going to take you through what it was like to be a young co-designer. So we're very glad that Zak is here talking on behalf of, we did invite a few more other young co-designers, but it's a very busy time in their life, so unfortunately the others weren't available, but Zak has very kindly agreed to be here to talk through it. So let me just get on to your slide and just let me know when you're ready to move on to the next one.
Thank you. So hello everyone. I've already introduced myself, and I just want to speak about, you know, what it was like to be a young co-designer on the Lonely Not Alone project, and especially specifically how it was like working on the residential. So as it says, when we first started the campaign, it was we were all sort of thrown into a barn in Derbyshire and expected to come up with this great idea and pitch it in 7 days' time. So yeah, it was a challenge, and of course many of us at the time didn't know each other, never met, and like the most I would say some of us had was with face-to-face experience was through Zoom on previous years. So, you know, when we first got into the workshops and getting to know each other, there was a lot of tasks that we underwent and sort of games that we played to get to know each other. And I think at the time we didn't really realize how important it was to get to know each other. And other than just knowing each other's names, we really got to know who each other were and each other's lived experiences. And I think that came very, very important later on the project, because we were able to just relate stuff off of each other, and we knew each other's skills and weaknesses. So we were able to craft that into how best to work on the campaign. So as to say, you know, after the introductions, we got into little teams, started working on this project. And because of the fact that we knew each other so well within the first 2 days, because we were made to live with each other and get to know them, it was easier to come up with a campaign, as knowing people's skills, such as, let's say, marketing or social media, was really helpful because we knew who to assign each job role to. And specifically, the fact that we were given so much autonomy and just choice to just do as we felt was best. But yet to say, with autonomy comes a lot of interesting things. So we were given certain tasks to do, such as, I would say, the tinfoil task, I'm going to call it. And at the time, we had no clue, zero clue what was going on and where this was going. So we were to dress up as animals and reenact this, how loneliness was in this form of a tinfoil animal. But then afterwards we got together and we talked about it a bit more, and turns out that was our 2022 campaign idea, and it evolved to become sort of the photo shoots that we did in 2022. So, you know, there was a method to the madness, I see. But that's what it was like to be a young co-designer. There was so much that you didn't understand at the time, but as you went along, everything just sort of became clearer and clearer. As well as that, Effervescence was brilliant. And just to add, like, Effervescence wasn't really sort of a hierarchy or looking over us while doing these tasks. So to say, it was more guiding us through tasks. So the way I'd describe it is that Effervescence was a compass, not a captain. So they would guide us through different tasks, but they'd never say to us, you should do this and this in this way. Because, of course, with the campaign being youth-led, it was really important to be able to have youth ideas and being able to watch it grow and establish throughout, and the way we wanted to see it and the way we envisioned the campaign to become. Next slide, please. Yeah. Yep. But of course, not everything is perfect. So if Lonely Not Alone were to continue or to go on, or any other campaign run by Co-op Foundations, what we would improve was we had quite large gaps in between of certain areas where we just didn't hear from any of the teams, not from Co-op or like F. So it would have been nice to be a little bit more involved in the background, because there would be times where we as young co-designers would be like, so is there any updates? Is anything happening? What's going on? So I think it would be better if young people were involved more with sort of the background of how projecting and campaign work happens, because we did have people with that sort of skill and who could have learnt from it, but we weren't fully given that opportunity. As well as that, we felt that the Co-op Foundation was a little bit sort of, how to say, distant from the project, as we didn't get to hear from them very often. So we heard from them at the start with the brief, and this is what we want. We want a campaign for loneliness, a youth-led, go. But after that, we didn't hear from the Co-op until we had to give the pitch, and that was kind of quite scary, and we didn't know, are we on the right track? Is this what we want? So I think it would have been better to have maybe a drop-in session with Co-op, maybe halfway through, to sort of show them and explain, this is what we're coming up with, this is how it's going so far. How do you find it? So that there's more involvement with the young co-designers and the Co-op Foundation. But furthermore, something that we sort of was a bit of a shock to us was the very, very, very formal delivery of the pitch to the Co-op Foundation. So it was at a table and it was through Zoom, and it was just a very formal pitch. And we felt that if this was going to be a youth-led campaign, it should be a lot more relaxed, and so that us as young co-designers aren't feeling immense pressure to perform or to give the perfect campaign, and having that little bit more connection with the Co-op Foundation would have also helped to not feel as hugely pressured sharing our final ideas with Co-op. So a few of our statistics, in early 2022, only 50% of young co-designers said, it was true, that it was true or definitely true that when they feel lonely, they do something about it, so that they can feel less lonely. And then they also said that 80% said it was definitely true that it was normal for people of their age to feel lonely sometimes. So as you can see, those figures have increased to 100% each, and it really, really shows that Lonely Not Alone had a huge effect on us as well as young people, and really shaped and changed the view and the stigma surrounding loneliness. And as well as that, there's a few quotes from other young co-designers about how Lonely Not Alone was to them and how the experience of it changed our lives, I'd have to say. It was such a special experience, and I'm very happy I took part in it.
And we're very glad that you did too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And just to say that I had a session which is where some of the things that, and Zak was on that call, we've taken on board what the young co-designers said. When we are launching our new campaign work, which we're hoping to share more information about that next month, we will be taking this learning forward so that we can work with young people in a slightly different way. So just a huge thank you really for being so honest. It's really very much appreciated. So now I'm just going to briefly talk you through some of the learnings that we found from closing down the campaign, or cooling down the campaign, whichever way you'd like to phrase it. We have not been in the position where we've closed down a campaign before, so there's been quite a bit of learning that we thought we would share in case it's helpful for others now or in the future. So the first thing we did was we looked into best practice from other organisations. That was really helpful in gathering how we could make sure that the campaign, for want of a better term, had a good death, as a lot of other people that have done other closed campaigns have referred to it. We also, right from the start, needed to create an exit strategy. So we started this last year. We were still in the process of hopefully finding a steward for the campaign, which we were unable to do. But we started that process to make sure that from the start, we knew exactly when we were going to do our final launch, when we were going to involve stakeholders, make them aware, and then what we were going to do towards the end of this year, when we were going to do something like sharing our learning like we are doing now, but also some other bits as well. Then we mapped out key moments for the campaign. So we had some key milestones that we wanted to make sure that we had as the final for our final year in advance, so that we knew that when they were happening, and we could make sure that it was coordinated with the rest of the Co-op Foundation campaign activity, and also just wider Co-op Foundation activity. We thought it was really important from the start to be open and honest about the campaign and the reasons why we were closing. We wanted to be very transparent about that, and just make it clear that the reason that we were moving on was all about the fact that we had launched a new strategy. Young people had directed us to campaign on other topics, so that's why we had to cool down Lonely Not Alone. But we would be doing a lot, including sharing our learning and making sure that we expanded the digital universe before we did that. We thought it was really important to involve those with lived experience, so the young co-designers, in the plans for the year. So you might have seen in June, we launched the campaign to coincide with Loneliness Awareness Week, to make sure that they had a chance to reflect and celebrate what they've achieved. And we thought it was really important for them to direct that, like they have done in previous years. So it was important for us to involve them throughout this year, and obviously have, as I say, having the young co-designers involved in today as well, so you can hear from them firsthand rather than me reiterating what they have told me. And finally, making sure that there was space for people to share their highlights and key moments as well. We've done this via social media, but also just encouraging people, the young co-designers, as I say, did it through the content they created this year, but also giving people an opportunity to do that through the digital universe. Hannah, can I ask you to swap with me and start sharing the screen, just because my computer's doing some funny things in the background. So we'll just do a quick swap, and then I'm going to go on to recommendations, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Anna.
How's that for everyone?
It's just loading. There we go. And then it's just slide 25, if that's okay. I like the way that yours is showing the full screen, and I can do that, and I'm in the office. But it's just typical, really, isn't it? Thank you. We'll be very patient. Thank you. And at least we can all see it on full screen now. So that was probably, we should have done that from the start. But we're here. So now on to recommendations. So we're going to start with our recommendations for creating content with young people. We could talk about this for a long time. Eloise has done a really good job of doing that. But these are some of the short bullet points. So first of all, being guided by young people's authentic experiences and not telling them what their experiences it is. And that seems really obvious, but we thought it was really important to create that as a bullet point as part of this presentation. One thing we learned from the feedback from the young people during the session that I mentioned that Zak was part of, young people really appreciate rehearsal days for creative shoots. So you'll obviously see from the photography shoots and other things like that, having a rehearsal day would really benefit those, especially those that maybe are a little bit anxious, a little bit nervous and have not done it before. They want to know what they're going to expect in advance. So that was some of the feedback that we'd had. Giving young people active roles in developing content. So whether that is the workshops that obviously Zak has provided some detail on, but also we had a couple of the young co-designers involved in developing content and running our social media channels, especially those who are interested in potentially pursuing a career in marketing and social media. It gave them the opportunity to experience that firsthand with support from us. So that was really helpful as well. And from a social media engagement perspective, it was great because they were able to provide responses that sound like young people, as opposed to me as a 30-year-old sounding like a young person, which is so much harder than I thought it would be. And finally, creating, what we learned was that when we first launched the campaign in 2021, we had the one offer, which was around sharing your story. What we learned from feedback was that that was quite, in some cases, quite emotionally taxing for some people, or some people didn't feel that they wanted to share their story, but they wanted to do something. So we learned that we needed an accessible intermediate activation for the campaign, which is when we introduced message of support. That was for people who maybe had experienced loneliness previously but didn't want to share their story, but also it was a good opportunity for people who hadn't experienced loneliness to get involved in the campaign, to say, you know, this is how you could encourage people to support you. It goes without saying that when you are working with young people, you need to identify peak periods when they're most likely to be busy, whilst also taking into account when you're going to be able to reach them and when they might be most lonely. So just to put that out there as well, as that was a learning piece of learning for us as well. On to next slide, please. So some advice for funders as well. So partnerships are really essential for developing the campaign. The campaign would not have been as successful as it was without our amazing partners, many of which I know are on the call today. So a huge thank you again for all your support over the last 5 years. It really helped us to reach young people in a lot of ways, and also helped us to raise awareness of the campaign and driving in the later years attention to the website. So do not underestimate the power of partnerships. I know we all already know that, but I think it was really important to have that as a point on here. Lone Not Alone, we realised, would have benefited from an exit strategy right from the start. So not presuming the campaign would last forever, but actually saying, you know, if there was ever a day where we were looking at closing it, what would our exit strategy be? And that's not in huge detail. It could be, you know, quite a loose template, but just having that in advance so you know what it looks like, we think on reflection would have been quite helpful. Now, it's fair to say measuring loneliness can be quite challenging. So what we did as an organisation is we looked at our wider work around loneliness. So I mentioned the Belong programme earlier. And that had 4 outcomes. And one of those, as an example, was young people feeling more confident about talking about loneliness. So we took those outcomes and turned them into campaign outcomes. So, for example, one of the things that we tracked as an outcome was how confident young people feel talking about loneliness. We tracked those outcomes every year, and anything that needed particular attention, we amended our strategy the following year. So a good example of that, which I said I would talk about in more detail, is that the figure for young people feeling like society is treating youth loneliness seriously was quite low. And we wanted to do something to change that in 2022. That is why the message of support function worked really well, because it was open to people of all ages. So people of all ages could write a message to say, that they cared about youth loneliness, showing young people that society did, and as a result we saw that that figure increased. So you can see how those outcomes then reflect how they fed into the strategy the year after. Research with our target audiences being young people specifically showed our impact and also informed the annual campaign strategies. And what I wanted to say is there's different levels of research that you can do. So the cheapest option would be solely looking at, for us, it would be the young co-designers, the impact that the campaign was having on them, and then looking at research that you can collect from social media, whether you're doing that actively through polls or you're doing that through the reach and the engagement that you get with posts. The next option, which is a little bit more expensive but cheaper than the final option that we had chosen, is collecting or including questions in an omnibus survey. So it usually costs around, don't quote me specifically on this, but it costs around about sort of £500 to get a couple of questions in an omnibus survey, and that way you could track some of the outcomes. You then have the final option, which is what we did, where we did our own survey out to 2,000 people, young people, every single year, and that helped us create that final report that some of you might be familiar with. So there are different ways that you can track research depending on your budget. We use each of them each year, and obviously choose the more expensive option as the campaign budget grew. But just to make you aware that we found that the research was really, really helpful, and we would do that in future campaigns as and when we can. As many of you might know, it's quite difficult to encourage national behaviour change through a campaign alone. So that is why the wider funding programme we had as well, they complemented each other really well. So we had the campaign that was aiming to tackle the stigma of youth loneliness, but we also had the funding that we had to help create change on more of a community level. And again, kind of elaborating on the fact that campaigns can reach an impact that goes beyond funding alone. So again, that we found that those two things really complemented each other and helped us to really drive change in tackling youth loneliness. Marketing, so just a few points on this. We found that behind the scenes content performed really well, and user generated content, so young people sort of recording themselves. You might have seen, if you're familiar with our social media channels, that we favoured that, especially that behind the scenes stuff. It was quite nice to share a bit of a sneak peek before the campaign launched. So for anybody that's considering how they create content for social media channels or other channels, we'd highly recommend behind the scenes, working particularly well on Instagram and TikTok at the moment, as many of you might know. It's also really important to be audience-led when choosing marketing channels. So finding out from young people specifically what channels they're choosing, rather than solely, relying on reports that you've seen. Speaking to young people directly is really helpful, instead of jumping to any sort of conclusions with that. I've already touched on the fact that we involve young people in helping to manage our social media platforms. You'll see, or you might have seen that from the comments that we had. So when we had young people leaving comments on TikTok or Instagram specifically, it was nice for young people to be able to respond to those, so there was authentic engagement. And it also gave the young people an opportunity to facilitate meaningful conversations with other young people, which we thought was great, and it's something that we would definitely look to do again. Social media, as anybody that runs a social media channel knows, that it is a lot of work, especially capitalising on trends and creating a consistent buzz around the campaign. It's not a case of just putting one post out a week or one or two posts out a week. So if you can afford to outsource any sort of social media support, we would highly recommend doing that. Again, that's really helped us over the years to have an expert that comes in-house and supports us with that a couple of days a week. And also any opportunity for giving young people the opportunity to talk about their experience directly. We have tried to do that wherever we can, through media opportunities, through events such as today. It's really important that if the young people want to be given the opportunity to do that, we're able to facilitate that with our usual sort of safeguarding hat on as well, of course. But it's important that people want to hear from the young people directly, as opposed to us relaying any messages. And finally, research. So as I mentioned, it can be very time intensive, but it's really important to be able to understand the impact that you're having. especially in the sense of youth loneliness, understanding how we're contributing to tackling that issue. It was really valuable. The PR value of research. So last year, for example, we got quite a lot of media coverage because our research showed that not having access to the financial resources to be able to tackle loneliness was having an impact on how lonely they felt, which obviously aligned with a lot of the cost of living crisis stories. So that helped us to have an impact. But that's not the reason we were doing the research. It was just an incidental impact of doing the research itself. So I just wanted to put that point across, that you can get PR for that, but don't do research specifically for PR value, because you don't know what you're going to get, obviously, through the research. We also found, as I've already touched on, that research helps to influence yearly campaign output, and also helps you to strengthen decision making. So when we were making decisions about where we were going to put the billboards, for example, we decided that we were going to put them near universities and colleges, because our research showed that it was students who were really struggling. They were one of the key groups that were really struggling with loneliness. So it made sense for us to put those billboards in those areas. And we also used the regional data that we got back from the research to target the areas where loneliness was considerably higher. And it's just really helpful to have those decisions guiding you as you're making those decisions. Next slide, please. Now we're just going to do a bit of a Q&A before I've got a couple of slides before we wrap up. So Hannah, I'm not sure if we've had any questions through that we can answer, or if anybody's got any now, feel free to jot them or pop them in the chat. If we don't get time, as you'll see there, if we don't get time to answer your questions, or you want to ask me a question specifically, you can also drop me a message directly. That's absolutely fine.
We have had some questions.
Fabulous.
So we had two questions from Nikki, so I'll put them into one. The first question from Nikki was, how do you recruit your initial group of young people?
Okay, so I imagine that'll be me and Eloise tag team. Yeah. So I know that so at the co-op we have co-op academies, and we involve the students a lot in that initial sort of step of involving them in what the campaign would look like. So for us personally, that was really helpful to be able to give co-op academy students the opportunity to do that. Eloise, do you want to talk about it from a F perspective?
Yeah, it's quite involved really, but we worked very, very hard to make sure that young people got this information from people they trusted in the first place. So teachers, social workers, youth workers. So we used those kinds of gatekeepers to help us get to young people, and young people had to apply to take part. So there were three major questions. One was a kind of question about, tell us a little bit about what it is that you know about loneliness that you'd like to bring to this. One was, what other skills are you bringing to this that you'd really like to use and get involved with in the campaign? And one was, what do you want to gain from this? Like, what is important to you that you need from this experience? And that enabled us, along with our kind of load of psychographic and demographic factors, to work out who to invite to come based on their gender and their age and their regional kind of where they were based in the UK, but also the type of lonelinesses they had experienced and what they both needed and wanted to give, so that we kind of created a really balanced group. So it was basically an online application process, and in general we'd get between 6 and 10 times more applications than we could actually accept. But we made that very clear all the way through, and as we communicated back to young people, we would say, you know, either you've been offered a place on this, or the reason you haven't is because we got loads and loads and loads of women, for example. So, you know, we've had to balance it out to make sure that it's kind of more representative of young people in the UK.
Thanks, Eloise. So there's another question from Nikki. Hannah.
Yes, there was. So where did you show the videos? I have shared our the Lonely Not Alone YouTube link in the chat if anyone wants to check them out in full, but whereabouts did we show them?
So we showed them at events like this. We used them mainly for social media. So the day of launches, we shared them on social media, and then we repurposed them. So they were also obviously on YouTube, but the main reason that people saw them was social media, and also we used them in marketing. So we would include them in our newsletters, and things like that. Or, as I say, when we were holding events like today or we attended any other events, we would include them in those as well.
And on the subject of social media, Nicholas asked, will the Lonely Not Alone social media presence also wind down?
Yes, so the plan for the social media page is that it will we'll continue to post on it until the end of the year. Then it will stay open, but we won't be actively posting on it. I should say now, in relation to the website, given that it's kind of linked, the website, you won't be able to add a story or a message of support beyond this year. So from the 1st of January, it will become a static resource. But the website will still be live, so you can still direct young people to it. They'll still be able to explore the stories and the messages of support that are already on there.
Cool, we've got a few more questions. Laura asked, what was your most effective communications channel? How did you reach the most people? And was it the billboards?
Yes, so I'll answer the first one. So the most effective type of communication, I would say, it's probably not going to be particularly surprising, but social media. We were quite lucky that we were able to get some, I suppose they call them grants from X, which used to be Twitter, although I accidentally always call it Twitter instead of X. But on that occasion, somehow I remembered it was X. And Facebook as well, which obviously includes Instagram. We were able to get some grants, so we were able to promote our ads through there so that we had a greater reach. We also found that the emails were really effective, so building that up as well, making sure that people had a newsletter that could be delivered to their inbox as well, so we could send them updates. But I would say social media and email marketing were probably the most impactful. It's really hard with billboards because you obviously set them up and you're given a certain amount of footfall that will hit that area, but you don't necessarily 100% know the impact that they've had in the same way that you do with social media and with email marketing. You can see how many people have clicked through, you can see how many people have engaged with the posts. You don't get that as much with billboards. That's not to say that we regret using billboards, it's just that measuring the impact is slightly different. So I think we still would have taken the same approach. We still would have done that with billboards. It's just that you wouldn't get the same sort of impact with that. Was there a third question? There was a third question, wasn't there?
It was just asking if it was the billboards that was the most effective. And then we had a question from Nikki, which is asking about out-of-home media and social media, and if we used any other ways to get the message out, which, Soph, I think you've covered in that last question, answer. Is there anything else you want to say?
Yeah, the only other thing I would say is partners have made a huge difference. So again, a huge thank you to everyone on the call that's ever supported the campaign. That has made a huge difference as well, and providing people with resources like providing posters and leaflets that people can download from the website, and providing youth work pack, that really made a difference as well. So yeah, partners, I would never ever underestimate the importance of involving them as well. So that was really important to us too.
Amazing. Do you think we've got time for more question?
Maybe one more, and I was going to say, if anybody doesn't get their question answered, please do send it to me directly and I'll definitely get back to you on email. Want to make sure everybody feels that their questions have been answered.
Okay, so Ed has asked, would you be able to share your theory of change, and how useful was it in developing the campaign and keeping you on the right path?
Yeah, so we can definitely share the theory of change. So when this goes live, I'll see if there's a way that I can integrate it into the blog that we have. I think we've done that before, so I should be able to do that again. But yes, we can definitely do that. And it helped to guide us on what we were going to do each year, because we knew what the objective was each year. So whether it was around building empathy or encouraging young people to talk about loneliness and building actually that knowledge around loneliness. So if we were to do something similar, if we were to campaign in a similar sense again, I think we would definitely do a theory of change again, because it's really helpful for knowing what stage you're at in the campaign and guiding a lot of your decisions. So hugely valuable for us, yes.
Cool. And Eloise, was there anything on an agency side about the theory of change that you'd like to mention?
Only to state the obvious, which was every year as we took the data, the research that Co-op Foundation was doing, and we worked with the theory of change, that all became the brief that we'd take into the workshops with the young people and really get down and dirty with. So it wasn't just that the adult teams were using it to make decisions, it very much strategically informed how we generated the insight and the creative expressions for every year that we were generating material.
Great. Just got a couple of extra things to say before we depart, because we've only got 4 minutes left, if Co-op clock is right. So finally, as I've mentioned, you won't be able to add a message of support onto the website beyond this year. So we're really encouraging people, if you haven't already, to leave a message of support, no matter what your age is. It's accessible to all. I've put the QR code on there so you can scan it, and you could do that today if you want to, if you haven't already. And then Eloise and her team created this video, which we're going to be sharing, and you'll see, you've got a sneak peek because we haven't put it out yet on social media. But we're going to be sharing this towards the end of the year to encourage people to share a message of support. If you see it, and please could you share it? One final ask. So if you don't mind playing it, Hannah, that would be very helpful. Thank you, Hannah. That song will be in everybody's heads for the rest of the day, by the way. You're welcome in advance if you haven't heard it before. Me and Zak were talking about this. Cool. And finally, just on the final slide, to say this is not the end of campaigning for the Co-op Foundation. We're launching a new strategy next month, which will give you a bit of insight into what we'll campaign on. We will be sharing all of that on our Co-op Foundation channel. So if you don't follow us on X, formerly Twitter, or LinkedIn already, please do so if you want to keep in touch with us. And you can also sign up to our blog on the Co-op Foundation website. You just scroll to the bottom and then there's an option to do that there. Other than that, it's just to say a huge thank you to you all for joining. Please do send me, I'm going to send a survey out, which you should hopefully get in about 15 minutes. If you wouldn't mind populating the survey, just let us know how you thought today went, minus the technical glitches, which I'm obviously very aware of. That would be wonderful. And if you do have any questions, don't hesitate to send them to me directly. Thanks very much, everyone.